Charlie Bondhus was born in Connecticut, in Waterbury, and then grew up in Farmington, Connecticut. However, tonight he came all the way from New Jersey to get here. He teaches there at Raritan Valley Community College and is also the editor of the Good Men Project, which he tells me is a website, and he's the poetry editor part of it, and it attempts to define what a good man is in the 21st century. His publications include the chapbook, What We Have Learned to Love, which was a winner of the Brickhouse Bones Stonewall competition. Some of his other books are How the Boy Might See It and All the Heat We Could Carry, which were both finalists for awards. The latter won the Main Street Rag Poetry Award and the Tom Gunn Award for Gay Poetry. Some of our members saw this highly awarded poet read at the Poetry Institute in New Haven and were so impressed that we urged him to come and read for us. So fortunately, he agreed. So let's all welcome Charlie Bondhus.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you everybody for your warm welcome and for having me back. Usually when I leave Connecticut, it's with a crowd behind me with torches and pitchforks.
Better watch out tonight.
Yes. So, no, this isn't required to do that. So I'll read, many of you, I believe, were at the Institute reading that I read at last year. So I'm not going to read a lot from All the Heat We Could Carry, because that's the book I read from last year. I'll read a couple poems from All the Heat, because people seem to like it. But I'm going to shift gears to newer work after that. So I'll start with just a couple poems from All the Heat We Could Carry. My little preface for this book is that it is poems written in the voice of a veteran from Afghanistan and his lover. And I never was a soldier myself. This is all based on research and interviews. But I'm going to start, of course, with the one poem that's not in the voice of either of them. It's going in the voice of somebody else entirely. This is called Memorial Day Barbecue. People screamed. Burgers and dogs hissed themselves brown. Beer bottles spat foam. More than a few of us were drunk. He looked better than I'd expected. I was picturing more, how should I say this, draggled, wild-eyed, like a prophet who's seen hell. He laughed with everyone like nothing had changed. Maybe war, like anything else, is something you get over. We noticed when he disappeared. I was chatting with his partner who didn't say much about it. We watched a crow assault a piece of bread. I didn't want to embarrass anybody, but I was curious. I walked around the house, past the red-streaked zinnias, and out to the street. He was sitting in the passenger seat of their car. He wasn't reading a magazine or making a call. He was just sitting with his hands on his knees, the tree's shadows passing over his face like large insects. Did he carry a gun in the glove compartment? I was remembering every Vietnam movie I'd ever seen, his eyes two unpinned grenades, overturned tables and smashed chairs, bowls of finger food shattered into small universes. When he saw me, I felt like I'd been caught stealing. We stared at each other for a few seconds before he smiled and raised his hand. He got out of the car and walked over to me, lit a cigarette, as we talked about this party and past ones. People we knew who weren't here, the summer heat's early arrival. I saw the glass edges of the moment, everything breakable, the pavement, the flowers, the silent car, all of it. I turned to walk back. He caught my arm. If they ask, tell them I was in the bathroom. So since it's October, I'll jump from summer to fall and read a poem titled October in the voice of the veteran's partner. 5 months after coming home, you stomp out to the yard after I insist on helping you. The rake's tines scraping the driveway, making a nails-on chalkboard sound. I watch from the window, hurt but admiring the ease with which you roll the season's lovely casualties into large and small heaps, working until a sudden gust turns the morning's labor into a firestorm, red and yellow clumps breaking apart and spreading themselves across the lawn. You return in the evening, sweat-covered and dirty, leaning on your rake, bearing by way of apology the last chrysanthemums of the season, a dying man rediscovering his beauty. One from Afghanistan, the veteran. The book switches from being back home and being in Afghanistan. It goes back and forth. Putting a body into a bag. Nobody I know. I'm supposed to be grateful, but all I think about is the mess. And why did the bullet have to pierce an artery? How much blood does the human body contain? Something I learned in science class and have since forgotten. No wind today, and the sun hangs heavy as an unanswered question, or meat on a hook. I light a cigarette, which doesn't make much sense. We need to move the body into the bag, and I need both hands. O'Reilly isn't in a hurry, though. He just stands there, eyes moving from the body to me smoking, to the body to me smoking. He finally shakes his head and mutters, "Shit," like the situation can be summed up in one word. And I'm about to agree until I realize he doesn't mean it that way. He means it literally. We both smell it, the stench breaking through like an explosion. It's in our ears, this desperate stink, this unavailing assertion of life, the body, furious at its destruction, finding one final way to express itself. No point in waiting. I stub out my cigarettes, grasp his ankles. O'Reilly grabs the shoulders. We hoist him, blood, shit, all into the nylon bag. And one more from this book. What he left after they separate from the lover's perspective. I know it's broken, but the cool, dark potential still unnerves me. Many things are wrong. Something rattling like coins in a jar. The bright silver firing pin snapped like a link in an old rosary. Its black weight makes my hands crinkle, 2 leaves flaking apart. The only way I can hold a thing so potent is with the knowledge that the moving parts are immobilized. It's always been this way. Loving chrome-cut men, so solid there's not a hollow space to accommodate the rising contractions of the heart. You showed it to me one day. Explained hammers, pins, and primer, cartridges and sparks, mechanical energy and chemical reactions. You said firing a gun is a little like writing fiction. There's an initiating action, a chain of events, the moment of crisis, and then the falling tension, the irrevocable resolution. But I know ours is not that kind of story. No climax. You simply packed what was useful and indisputably yours, leaving me everything that might have been ours. So why abandon this broken, deadly bit of memory you carried through Afghanistan? Hard and cold as canteen water, a memento of more than one desert, I cradle it as though it were your heart. So I'm going to shift gears now to a new old book or an old new book, depending on how you look at it. How the Boy Might See It was my first book of poems, published in 2009 or 2010. And it recently went out of print, and I have a friend who runs a different press in upstate New York, and he said, I'd love to do another edition of How the Boy Might See It. And I said, I kind of outgrew some of the poems in it. I don't know if I really love all the poems in that book still. So we cut a deal where we would just revised, expanded edition. I take some poems out, put new ones in, add a preface, and new cover, and there you go. So it's a revised, expanded second edition. Interestingly enough, I'm wearing the hat, shirt that I have on the author photo as well.
Yeah.
Yep, and I have my glasses over there somewhere. But all right, so I'll read you a couple poems from How the Boy Might See It. And let's. Okay, here's a poem with a title that you'll probably respond to. The Physicist at the Sex Club. As in population inversion, when overcrowded molecules exist in an excited state and the distressed atoms are compelled to emit their bright and beautiful photons, it is not a lack of love, but rather an excess that brings them to a hallway lit only by the red exit sign. Unscientific men who love thermodynamics, even if they don't know it, any more than they notice the minor temperature fluctuations and trace smells drawing them into each other's orbits. Heat is what matters, and all heat is of the same kind. Here I fill my hands with men, offering my mouth as anchoring place, steady point they can return and return to, while I gather their heat to mine, holding my breath, only expelling our shared temperature when it reaches critical mass. You and I, restoring each other to that blessed, elemental equilibrium, which, with no empirical proof of joy, is the most we can hope for. Let's see. So, I have a series of poems in this book, this new edition, in the voice of Jesus throughout his life. And the conceit is that Jesus is back and he's being interviewed. So the wraparound poem, the poem that introduces it, is called Diane Rehm Hosts Jesus Christ on NPR. Not the strapping Renaissance stud first encountered in my picture Bible. If Americans knew, they'd trade their crucifixes for a sexier god, one of the tan-faced Greek deities, or a Hindu avatar flexing 8 or more muscular limbs. Too short, too paunchy, and, yeah, you might as well say it, too ethnic to be an effective salesman for salvation. He lacks the masochistic sex appeal of a freshly whipped Jim Caviezel. Even the beard is bushy and dotted with crumbs. My producer smirks behind soundproof glass, mouths words I can't make out as I look back to my guest, swinging in his swivel chair while he pecks something in Aramaic on the smartphone one of our correspondents gave him as thanks for curing her brother's cancer. I think this is a situation better framed as a hypothetical, or at least given to a tabloid journalist, unafraid to ask, why are we here? What's God like? How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? But I'm expected to ask the hard questions that'll satisfy the pseudo-intellectual set, like, do you feel your crucifixion prefigured the Foucauldian notion of torture as public expiation? 2 minutes to showtime, and he looks up from his phone, smiles, reading my mind, of course, he's God, and says in a voice thick and white as milk, Sister, if you'll allow me, I would speak about what God shares with humanity and what I, both God and man, know better than anyone else. I mean loneliness, the 3 days in a tomb, the lone gaze over creation, solitude like a voice in the desert. You think you know something of loneliness, and so you do, but let me teach you and all who have ears how to transform those cold moments into a kind of divinity. As he speaks, light fills the studio. He grows taller, stronger, chiseled. My producer points to me. We're live. So the first poem, after that introductory poem in the sequence, is called Walking on Water. It felt like sin, or at least what I imagine sin must feel like. The cool shock on the bottom of the feet, the pleasant currents massaging sand from soles, the willing resignation to an unnatural state, And then blue weightlessness, like walking in the womb. Sardines zipped beneath, confused by the wave-striding giant, even though I was just a kid, 13 or 14, hot and bored, the day's lessons done, my stepdad at work on a chair for a rich family from Judea. I had gone down in the afternoon's doggy heat, planning a swim, but after stripping off my clothes, I thought, why not? It wouldn't be the first time I did something the other children couldn't. Running foot races at uncatchable speeds, levitating to the tops of olive trees, bringing a clay bird to life, all the stories that got expunged because their too young boy, tipsy on the rush, white as the walls of heaven where I came from. But that day, heaven seemed as far as my future, far as my earthbound parents, who by now had found me and were screaming on the shore. I looked into the tumbling waves and saw, small miracle, a school of tilapia, floating motionless, gazing at me, my brown skin and bony limbs repeating themselves in their unblinking eyes. Rain fell on my back, thick and hard as knotted leather. On the beach, my parents bawled. Two skin and hair shapes, I suddenly realized I had everything and nothing in common with. Walking with a girl. Not the one you're thinking of. It was before romantic comedies. Back when a man and a woman could be friends without sexuality's stone drag. Mary Magdalene was my assistant, my best gal pal, a hard-nosed, earthy woman who knew how to handle a crew of gruff, stinking fishermen. But a girlfriend? As the cliche goes, like dating my sister. And I had several, but that's a different interview. The one you want to know about is Leah, who I walked with when I was 17 and still a virgin. We both needed water, and the village only had one well, but we made excuses to extend the errand, taking the long way past the blacksmiths, talking about fruit trees and the brightly colored birds that inhabit them. At the time, I hadn't let anyone see my wonders, as I called them, embarrassed to show too much. But Leah's robes fit her in a way my fate never fit me, loose and lovely, enough room for the breeze to swell the blue-brown cloth, which reminded me of how it felt every time I performed a wonder, as if something sightless had passed through my body. We walked by the well, into a grove of olive trees whose shade hid my spreading blush. The earth turned red beneath our feet. Mid-flight, a bird died and then came back to life. The sun danced across the sky. Our desert rough knuckles brushed. I remembered I was God, and that made me very sad. So, first we have a non-veteran writing poems about war, and then we have an atheist writing poems about Jesus. All right, so I will read one more from this book, and I'm just going to read a couple new poems, and then I'll step down. My father takes some English courses. We sit at Starbucks, where my father, back from 45 years of work, tells me about his latest stab at self-improvement. English 211, the British literary tradition, taught at night at the local community college. It's strange to see him, man of decimal and bullet points, who worked 70 hours a week dyeing DNA strands, grappling with the same answerless questions that caused me to smoke pot, read Bukowski, and write poems no one understood. And yes, he is frustrated by Chaucer after hours, stray syllables of Middle English falling from his tongue like bits of ravioli, while I dust off my Penguin edition of the Canterbury Tales in translation. Here, Dad, try this. I watch him thumb my old textbook, brown with 10-year-old coffee stains, his eyes searching the page for profundities, the unassuming prose of my old margin notes cropped tight alongside Chaucer's decasyllables like a cheap frame holding a classic painting. We sit like this for a few minutes, the customers coming and going like semesters. If I squint my eyes just right, I can see the unspeaking years hanging between us, gravid with mutual obsession, both of our lives taken up with the heavy business of marking the world. So I'll just read a couple poems from the newest manuscript. My newest manuscript is called Divining Bones. It is on its way. It is out there in the at a few publishers. It's different from the work I've done before. The poems deal largely with things like magic, the occult, gender, transformation. And when I was practicing reading them out loud, I found that it really made the most sense to perform them. Kind of influenced by the fact that I've been reading poets, I guess, like Anne Waldman and Alice Notley, who are really into that oral tradition of poetry. The poem, not just as a thing you read, but also as a thing you hear. So it's going to sound really pretentious, but I'm trying to go read these poems bearing in mind the oracular tradition from which they are partly born. Don't really have much of a background in performance poetry, so this could be pretty bad, or it could be interesting. I'll try not to sound like William Shatner doing Shakespeare, but the only thing you really need to know other than that is that several of the poems deal with Baba Yaga, who is, for those, I hear a few ahs, I guess some people know who she is. She's a mythological witch in Russian folklore. She's a crone. She has one leg made out of bone. She lives in a house on chicken legs, which I love. She flies in a mortar and pestle, and she allegedly eats children. So I'll start with Baba. Becoming Baba Yaga. I was born an old woman, I mutter through lather, as I scratch away the beginnings of a beard, each stroke bringing me a hair closer to alignment with the female divine, curling and kicking inside, while I glare at the little snub nose which belies the long crooked phantom, pressing my skin like an erection in the underwear I buy a size too small. My dreams are full of chicken legs, while my thighs tingle for the swish and stroke of a checkered peasant skirt. Invisible, hand-woven blouses girdle my imaginary breasts. I tug at my boy-short hair and think about bright silk headscarves. There is no other way to say this. I was meant to be a wise and powerful Russian witch, rather than an unimpressive man. A truth that makes me ambivalent about the pretty young women who come seeking transformation, asking me to shave away the fat a child left, straighten a nose crooked as a kidney bean, plump up breasts which are like the hard, rounded nubs of an old cook's pestle. Like any witch, I serve the vanities of all who can afford my fees, helping those who hate their bodies in ways different from how I hate mine. I study the college photos they bring of glamorous, uncomplicated youth, remembering an old, lost book and the engravings in which I recognized myself, a fierce, bestial woman, as necessary as bone and just as unseen in a world whose first language is skin. Sometimes when I'm finger deep in a body, I think about the way beauty slithers through the tunneled centuries, collecting and sloughing trappings as it goes, and I know that my inherent self, though not beautiful, is timeless in the way of snakes, storms, and ancient forests, and that if I were to turn scalpel and curette on myself, out would pour a great and silent river of clear water, from whose banks would emerge wild things unknown to beauty. Here, grip my hand and you'll see it too. Wet fire, living skulls, a house that walks, a male crone, Baba Yaga birthing herself. Sometimes a great place for poetry is to think about, to have interesting titles just come to you, and then saying like you get a premise and you're just like, I'm just going to roll with it. So this is what happened to me with this one. A first grade production of Oedipus Rex. Creon stutters anarchy and trips on his chiton, knocking over a Corinthian column made of fruit boxes. The smell of half-rotted honeydew spills from the stained flaps as the non-union Argonauts smoke cigarettes by the loading dock, and Ms. Meropa recalls the prophecy the boy who ended up playing Tiresias made during second period. Costumed in 6-year-old certainty, dire predictions flew from his mouth like harpies. Neither the school nurse nor the class healer could restore his sight. And that's how we got here. The grease paint chorus, shrieking and chattering while it stumbles left to right, still landing, as rehearsed, in the correct spots. Just like fate, Jocasta mutters, tightening the rope around her waist. No matter how torn the map, or how many forests, rivers, and deserts missing or mislabeled, we still arrive in our predetermined places, all because somewhere else, the gods, left a trio of grim sisters, the busy work of spinning, measuring, and cutting. Offstage, Oedipus stands, his mother's bedsheet twisted around his sapling shoulders, waiting for his cue, watching it all unfold with eyes hollow as cored fruit. So, let's see. How about, let's do something weird. I know I just did something weird. We'll do something even weirder. The hagiography of Sister Dottie Backdevilray. In the second year of my novitiate, they found me floating in the supine position above the altar in the fish chapel. All around were disembodied slit eyes which twitched and darted. They were, someone said, the eyes of sexually excited reptiles. I used to preach, in the river there are 52 kinds of wishes. Some of the onlookers fainted. Many made the sign of the fishhook. A few sang shanties. Yet still the eyes swarmed, like Candiru around chumming. Everyone thought they would devour me. So many times I felt like a sparrow on the verge of flight. But then the eyes fell prostrate, tamed like obedient dogs, and disappeared. My tits made it necessary to be stern, but not too stern. My penis allowed me a certain puckishness. For days afterwards, the chapel reeked of lizard guano. No one ever saw them again except me, for whom they were ubiquitous, as those red and blue birds that lived in the belfry and sang the hymns Sister Aloysius taught them. And in the same way that Sister A was eventually named La Patroness de los Pájaros, I came to be known as La Virgen de los Flying Lizards. So I've got, I'm timing to myself to about a half an hour, and I'm just about there, so I'll just go on my way out. Why don't I, okay, let's close on 2 more Babas. Baba Yaga does porn. First on set, she's taken in by the lights, whiter than the skin she thinks she wished for when a girl. But has she ever been a girl? Baba Yaga could never be a child's name, and yet she can't recall ever being Anya or Vasilisa, or hearing the light tripping vowels of a pretty girl's name skipping off the lips of a beautiful mother like a pebble skimming a pond. She unravels her headscarf, lets fly ropes of hair braided like gray-white flames which slap against her backside. In the mirror, her body is an old downy pear with too many rot spots. Even so, she's told there are men who will pay for such things. Tapping pockmarked fingers on a doughy thigh, Baba Yaga tries to imagine such men who reject beauty's slick uncertainties for the reliable inertia of a wrinkled breast and a pale teat. Men who find beauty threatening in a way a hobbled bone leg is not. No, Baba Yaga decides, hefting her gut. She was never beautiful, nor was she ever consistent, pleasing in the way ugly girls ought to be. And though she thinks there was a time she wished herself fair as bone, she can't be sure of her own story any more than she can be sure of the century. She glances around the simple set. A king-size bed, hotel furniture, tastefully bland tchotchkes. The kind of room anyone could live in, but no one would choose to. She dresses and departs to the back lot where the mortar is parked, waiting to receive her bony limb and the flesh it supports. She flies high above the San Fernando Valley, concealed within the orangey folds of reflected street lamps, pausing at 30,000 feet, an unseen, low-hanging star. As always, it's the distance that makes her invisible, the distance and the light. Sorry, that was a bait and switch. She doesn't actually end up doing porn, but... Well, I'll read one more poem and say thank you all for coming when you could have been home watching The Blacklist or How to Get Away with Murder. I'm DVRing those. Self-portrait as Baba Yaga. Sundays I go down to the Hungarian deli on the Lower East Side, where I can get away with eating children if I'm sly about it, slipping them into the goulash when no one's looking. Later, I cruise Coney Island in my mortar and pestle, but only the elderly Soviet emigres and granny fetishists pay attention. These days, I cast queer spells and burn myself at the stake for the crowds, offering nickel love potions to the lovelorn at 33rd and 7th. I have a tortoiseshell cat who catches mice and speaks Polish, and a tortoiseshell comb that turns into a city when it's thrown on the ground. When out-of-town children ask my gender, I tell them I'm a witch. Thank you very much.